Thank you, Hope, and good morning, everyone. We appreciate you tuning in with us again this week. This webinar is designed for our restaurant, hotel, travel and tourism, and our supplier partners, and is off the record. It's not designed as a press call, although we do many calls with the press. We typically get back to them within hours from the time they call, if not minutes. So please understand that. Also, I'd like to remind all of you that PRLA has suspended all the collection of dues throughout the crisis from our hotel and restaurant partners. And consequently, we're especially appreciative and would like to thank our partners at Dell Technologies today for sponsoring this update. Dell has been a true friend to our industry, and we hope that you will consider them for the next purchase of laptops, desktops, servers, and more. Doesn't sound like we're probably going to be buying much right now, but think of them when we come out of this. Dell provides discounts for PRLA members, and they can be found at dell.com /PRLA. And remember, today, all restaurants and hotels are members of PRLA because we're there for you to provide the information resources you need and to try to provide the resources you need to survive this pandemic and come out on the other side. So with that, I'll introduce Melissa. Melissa, take it away.
Okay. Eric, you wanna pop forward another one? All right, we're gonna jump right into it. I do have to do one disclosure because I was asked this. There is coffee in my coffee mug. There's not even bourbon in with the coffee. It is just coffee. There's not vodka or anything else. So I wanna make that clear from the get-go. I don't start that until much later in the day, like noon. So let's get started. Not a ton updating on the CARES Act and the P3, but I will tell you what we know. Some of it is not great, some of it's hopeful, and some of it is just the government. So we did get more funding last week for the P3 and the EIDL. I will tell you this much. The P3 was funded to a tune of another $250 billion, and primarily only those that were in the queue or immediately got in the queue are accessing the new P3 funds, so the new PPP funds that were passed by the government last week. Some banks have already, actually most banks have already closed the application process, and they actually believe that additional $250 billion is going to run out at the end of this week. So if you have not gotten in, there's no guarantee that you will get in unless they do another refunding of the P3 as part of another package moving forward. With that, I do have on here, and the EIDL, like I said, has been refunded. As far as we know, the EIDL has not run out of money yet, but that is also because it's taking them that much more time to process the EIDL application. So there is no guarantees, even on the EIDL front, that you will be able to access those funds. And we are still waiting for some guidance from the SBA as it relates to those funds. Our hope was that people who might have applied and didn't get the amount that they needed would be able to kind of tap into more. It looks like they are only processing new applications right now, but we have not gotten any official answer on that whatsoever. I think it really just depends on how many people are tapping into the EIDL funds at this time. Treasury guidance. We have been talking now for weeks about the issues with the P3. Those issues are not going away. And as we get to the reopening process, and I go through some of those details in Pennsylvania, those aren't going to go away anytime soon. But as I also mentioned, there are some things that the Treasury Department can change. And there's two things primarily that they could change that would help all of you. One is saying you can pick your 8-week period to use the P3. With that being said, a lot of you have already started having to use it. So that's not necessarily going to help a lot of you right now. But the second is changing that 75-25% requirement regarding the use of the funds. And maybe saying 50% can be used for payroll, 50% can be used for mortgage payments, rent, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities. Treasury is supposed to be putting out more guidance as it relates to using the P3. And our national partners, the National Restaurant Association, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, are pushing very hard to try and get that percentage down, to recognize the fact that we're not fully operational. Even in the states that have reopened, they are not fully operational. And further, you're not getting your employees back. That's COVID 4.0, where I'll talk about that $600. That $600 is still really being a nightmare for all of you in terms of trying to get your employees to come back to work, because quite frankly, they don't want to. They're doing better on unemployment than they were working. And we will not revisit the statement from the governor the other week as it pertains to just paying them more, because you all are flooded with cash and you could just do that if you wanted to. Additionally, as I said, COVID 4.0 is going to be the next package. And our national folks are looking at creative ways to try and tackle that $600. I know in the past, we were looking at maybe a phase down of the $600 once you can reopen. That $600 they're getting from unemployment might start phasing down to encourage them to go back to work. A reverse of that is maybe finding a way to encourage them to go back to work, and they'll still get the $600 maybe until the end of July. So they'd actually be making even more money than they were on unemployment by going back to work. So it's kind of a reverse in an effort to try and find that middle ground between the Republicans that don't want to spend any more money on anything, the Democrats that want to extend the $600 to the end of September, and where the two can meet. So that's being kind of bandied about at the federal level. And further to that, the state can change that $600. The problem is that once people start receiving it, it's really hard to take away. So how do we fix it, and how do we make it work to encourage employees to go back to work? As I said last week, you can still fill out that UC 1921 form. If you offer work to your employees and they refuse to come back to work, you have to fill that out within a week. They are required to come back to work if you offer them work. Now, I know a lot of you don't want to be in that position of kind of turning your employees in for refusing, and that's why we really are working to find that sweet spot of getting your employees back and not having them hate you for having to come back because they're not receiving that $600 anymore. Further, in COVID 4.0, as I mentioned, we're looking at the unemployment piece. We're looking at trying to refund the P3 and the EIDL as needed, expanding that to 501c6, getting additional recovery funds. And I mentioned this a few times over the past few weeks. The P3 is great, and I will quote our national folks on this, that it probably only gets you about 30% across that chasm that you're trying to cross to get back to operations. And it's really not helping you with your cash flow. So we're going to need more help. Our industry is going to need more help to kind of bridge the gap to come out on the other side of that. And that will include additional recovery funds, in addition to tax credits, tax breaks for the industry as we try to come out on the other side of that. All of that is part of COVID 4.0. If you were not on the call last week, I will repeat what I said last week. This is not going to be like the CARES Act. Democrats want to spend more money. They want to send out another check to everybody, like the $1,200 that were sent out a few weeks ago. Republicans on the other side are saying we've spent a lot of money. We don't want to spend any more. We are hundreds of trillions of dollars in debt. And finding a place for them to meet in the middle, I think, is really going to be a struggle here. Even to the point where we've had some Republican leaders say that they would prefer states go bankrupt before they get more funding from the federal government because they're worried about how those funds would be used. So all of that is going to be part of COVID 4 when Congress returns on May 4th. So all of the things, the extra funding we need, we're not there yet, but hopefully when they return on May 4th, we'll start seeing some packages come together in order to get that relief to all of you, because the P3, we know it's not enough. The EIDL, we know more than anything that is not enough to get you on the other side of this. I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, let's, it's the stoplight, the governor and the stoplight. All right, so I'm going to go through the announcement the governor made last week, what we know, what we don't know. As you all know, an announcement is typically made, and then it takes us about 2 to 3 days to actually figure out what the announcement means. But last week, the governor at 7 p.m. did a speech where he talked about the reopening of Pennsylvania. And he basically is using the traffic light approach of red, which is where all of us are right now. Everybody is in a do not travel, you must stay at home order. Then that would segue to yellow. Then that would segue to green. And I know I have a question on the green stage in restaurants as we go through it. The earliest that we will have any type of reopening, broad reopening, and then I'll get to the May 1st stuff in a second, is May 8th. And that is really going to be our rural counties. And the governor said this. We're looking at North Central. We're looking at Northwest. There are parameters that need to be in place. The only solid one that we have to work with is less than 50 cases for every 100,000 residents over the course of 14 days. That's the only baseline we have. And with that baseline is secondary factors of, can hospitals, do they have capacity if you go into the yellow stage? And 3, is there enough testing if you go into the yellow stage? Which is really at this point why they're talking about the more rural areas, because they don't need the number of tests your more suburban and urban areas are going to need. So May 8th is the closest we're going to get in terms of the first round of reopening, and that is the yellow stage. And I will get into the county piece as well. The yellow stage isn't all that different than where we are now. It's kind of like a slow roll. So some of your businesses that are closed, your shops that are closed, your neighborhood shops, your Kohl's, like your Hobby Lobbies, actually I think Hobby Lobby's saying they are essential, they can do curbside. So that would happen under the yellow stage. People should still work remotely if they're able. You can congregate, but you cannot congregate in groups of more than 25 people. So there's still a cap on that for those of you. And the biggest part of the yellow phase, which I know has been frustrating, is that restaurants will need to remain closed. Restaurants, entertainment places, movie theaters, gyms, all of those are required to remain closed as they currently are in the red phase when we hit the yellow phase. John has been working really hard in his conversations with the governor's office, and John, I think, would like to speak. So do you want me to stop talking, John, or?
Melissa, you, as always, have done a very, very good job. And let me just put the restaurants in yellow phase into perspective. And we have had some conversations about it. And you might say, well, why are restaurants not included in the first phase like we did? And the reality of it is there are currently only 11 states out of the 50 that have plans to reopen restaurants. And all of those are either in the South or in the upper Midwest, such as Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa. So it's not surprising that the governor and the Secretary of Health, in trying to protect the public, are being cautious about the opening of restaurants. It's frustrating, but it's not surprising. There are some states. Rhode Island put out a plan yesterday in their phase 1 that includes some semblance of outdoor dining for restaurants. So the good news is there's a dialogue with the governor's office to talk about ways that we can protect the public and still allow restaurants to do a little bit more than they're doing now, which is just curbside and delivery. So that's probably my update on it. We're tracking very closely with what other states are doing. It's pretty clear that some of the states like New York are going to really struggle. We heard yesterday that the upstate areas of New York may open, but it might be as late as August before Manhattan gets open, or who knows, maybe longer. So it's a long haul, and we're just trying to do everything we can, as Melissa keeps pointing out, to help our members and our non-members, all of the industry, get through this. So with that, if there's any questions that come up later, I answer. I'd be happy to them. There was one that came up while Melissa was talking about my comment about dues. Specifically, what we did is the PRLA suspended our collection of membership dues in PRLA that are coming due during this pandemic, because we want to help our members preserve the cash flow they're going to need to survive. And we've opened the association up to all, regardless of their past membership status. So we're providing services to several thousand more restaurants and hotels during the pandemic. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Melissa. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Of course. So as I said, when you transition to yellow, not all that much will change. And I will say this, the governor has said that this Friday, they will be announcing what counties will be eligible to transition to yellow stage. There are still a lot of unanswered questions. this is that drinking game again, I talk about unanswered questions, of what exactly yellow stage will entail. There's broad parameters, but they have not drilled down into details. And then even less parameters and information when you drill down into transitioning from yellow to green. They haven't even set what requirements will need to be met when a county goes from yellow to green. Now with all of that being said, I mean, when we hit green, our assumption, and like I said, this is all assumptions, is that restaurants will be able to be reopen. In yellow, there can be some transient travel. And this has also been a little bit of a contradiction. We have said, and the governor has said, you're not allowed to travel. You cannot go visit people. There was a question of the health secretary last night of if somebody, let's say, lives in a yellow area and works in a red area, can they travel there or vice versa? And she came right out and said, we aren't restricting travel. But with that being said, they're also saying that you shouldn't be traveling. So I'm not entirely sure the administration has exactly figured out how yellow stages will work. If you are allowed to travel within the two counties, let's say you have family, I have family in Montgomery County, I know Dauphin County is going to flip to yellow before they do, would I be allowed to visit my family there or vice versa? And we don't know any of those answers as of yet. I will say another item, they put out what they call a Bureau of Community Health Systems to try and designate what the regions are. And that is not solid. So please don't take that entire map to heart, especially my friends from Lancaster who are just appalled, and in Schuylkill County who are just appalled to just be included with the hot mess that is our Southeast friends and their COVID peaks. This is not firm what they're using. They're basically saying these are generally regions they're going to use. It's not solid. So you do not need every single county in your region to flip or hit that 50 per 100,000 threshold all at the same time and hold it for all at the same time. With that being said, and I will use Philadelphia as an example, if Montgomery County all of a sudden does better and Philadelphia doesn't, because there's so much transient travel between those two counties, I think that's where you're going to see the link between the reopening of counties. When you really see a lot of that transient travel, you're going to need more than 1 or 2 and 3 counties to hit that threshold before they will reopen them. And all of that will be designated as we move forward. I will say Philadelphia seems to go over its limit every 2 or 3 days. So Philadelphia does have a ways to go, as does a lot of the Southeast counties. I think that Allegheny County, as John mentioned on an earlier call, is just doing gangbusters in terms of controlling the spread in Allegheny County and Pittsburgh. So I think we will see some reopening next Friday. We'll see a little bit more after that. And then I think we might have a few weeks before we hit our next phase. And I will say, and John mentioned this, he's been having a lot of conversations with other states. And I know a lot of the restaurants are frustrated that you can't reopen in yellow stage. But with that being said, in the states where restaurants are reopening, the constraints are so much that it almost isn't worth it to open. They're putting you at 25% occupancy. Employees have to wear masks and gloves. You need to have reservations so there can be contact tracing in case anybody comes in with the virus. There's just a ton of constraints kind of on that yellow phase, which is why we want restaurants to open, and we are pushing really hard to try and get that outdoor space parameters and get creative with that. If restaurants cannot reopen with some flexibility in the yellow stage, but we are pushing hard for that, recognizing that we might not be fully operational at green. And I will say, even in the green stage, and I don't curse me out on the chat board for all of my friends and hotels that do weddings in large groups. I don't think we're not going to be flipping the switch on green. There's still going to be limits in terms of amount of people that can congregate in the same space. There's going to be limits of crowds. It might be 50, it might be 100. We don't know. But even when we hit green, we are not going to be fully operational. And we need to recognize that, and also recognize that if we don't do our part going through these phases, we will go back to red and be shut down all over again. So we really do need to tiptoe kind of through these phases. And if you are open and operating, or will be, to really just take extreme measures to protect your staff, protect your guests. That's why John has put together and our members have put together the Pennsylvania Promise, just to show that we are committed, because if we don't make our guests feel comfortable, they will not come and stay in our hotels. They will not visit our areas, and they will not eat in our restaurants. So that's going to be really important. May 1, the governor is recognizing that you can't shut everything down forever, that we do get a little antsy. So we do have some things that are reopening on May 1. Construction can reopen beginning on May 1 if you are a hotel and you've been holding off on construction, or a restaurant holding off on construction. Golf courses can open on May 1. With that being said, you can only have one person per cart. You have to practice social distancing if you are a golf course. Marinas, fishing trips, single group fishing trips can all begin on May 1. And private campgrounds are able to reopen on May 1. And before any of you ask me if we had a definition for what includes a private campground, by God, I would share it with you. We are still asking the governor what he means when they say campgrounds, because we're kind of, like I said, stuck in this. Can you travel in May 1? So then can campgrounds open because people are traveling? And when you hit yellow phase, or even before yellow phase, so now are we encouraging vacations? We don't know the answer to that, and we don't know exactly what private campgrounds are, other than state campgrounds and parks will remain shut for the foreseeable future. So we are looking for that clarification. Usually when they don't want to give a clear answer, it's because they don't want to urge everybody to do something, and this might be that type of scenario. I will say, if you are a DMO and you have cabins or campgrounds that in your area that aren't sure, the police are the enforcers of this. Your local police, your state troopers, they're the enforcers. I'm not the enforcer. You're not the enforcer. You really need to talk to your local authorities and determine how they view it and how they're planning to enforce it. And that's all we have. And as soon as we get more, we will absolutely provide it. But we still are kind of waiting. And I think the governor's office is still figuring out exactly what that May 1st, which is in 2 days, 2 days, will look like, and exactly how the May 8th yellow phase will reopen. So we will have tons of more information on all of that on next week's webinar. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the House and Senate are both in this week, so they're still moving things. Some of these are repeats, and well, one is a repeat and the others are kind of new updates. There is a push in the House, and I have to check and see if the bill is passed yet, but there's a push to stop any increase in property taxes in 2021 and school taxes in 2021, recognizing that schools are closed, individuals and businesses are struggling, and there should be no need for schools to increase property taxes if they are actually in session for half of the year. There is a partisan issue here. The Republicans want it, the Democrats don't, but it is being discussed as part of broader negotiations that are occurring as it relates to relief. So that is something that the House, like I said, they were supposed to pass it yesterday. I'm not sure if they did, because we'll get to House Bill 327, which clearly where my priorities were. But there is talk about that, delaying any increase in those taxes in an effort to recognize that there should be no tax increases when school is not in session in its full weight and authority. Act 15, I mentioned this last week. This is your property tax delay. Please check with your counties and your municipalities to see if they are pushing back property taxes. They are due tomorrow for the early payment. So if they have not, we're seeing more counties might be allowing you to push back your regular payment. The early payment of property taxes in a lot of counties have not been delayed. So please check with your counties and municipalities to see if there is a pushback of any of your property taxes that are due. That was signed by the governor. They are able to do it. They're authorized to do it. House Bill 327. Last week we talked about an amendment sponsored by Representative Kurt Mosser that would allow you to sell bottles of spirits out the door. It was only for restaurant licenses, the amendment as drafted. And we got word, actually almost after the webinar last week, that because the PLCB is a state-owned monopoly, the governor was really not going to sign any legislation that would allow any entity to sell one of the products that only the LCB can sell. So we could have fought to like the Dickens to get spirits, a bottle of Jack for you to sell out the door, but the governor probably would have vetoed it. So we really regrouped late last week and found some uncommon partners who are willing to work with us to find some common ground here. And what we were able to put together is the ability for R&H restaurant and hotel licenses, only restaurant and hotel licenses, would have the ability to sell mixed drinks out the door to consumers. So you could sell them for off-premises consumption. Some parameters to that. You have to sell it between 4 ounces and 64 ounces. That's your restriction. So you can't sell more than 64 ounces of mixed drinks to go out the door. I really just wanted a pitcher of margaritas. And I figure if you can sell a growler of beer, you should be able to get a growler of margarita if you really want to. In addition, it has to be a sealed container. And I will clarify what sealed container is, because we acknowledge that you might have trouble accessing large containers or things that you can seal. You can use, if you have a lid that would allow for a straw, if you seal the opening for the straw, that would be considered a sealed container under this. So you could sell those out the door to consumers. You do have to have prepared food available. They do not have to purchase prepared food with their to-go drinks, but you can't just open up your restaurant, open up the bar and not sell food. So you do have to have food and drink available for the consumer. In addition, you will need to obtain, you have 60 days to do so upon this passing, a transaction scan device to check IDs if anybody looks under the age of 35. I know a lot of you, if you do not have a wine expanded permit, you do not have those devices. But honestly, it's just something that's become a standard in liquor bills, but we were able to allow 60 days for you to get that. Now, further to this point, this is not a forever deal. This is only for the state of the emergency or when restaurants can hit 60% capacity, where you can have your threshold of allowing guests in is more than 60%. Upon that time, you would no longer be eligible to sell mixed drinks to go. And further to that point, this does only impact restaurant and hotel licenses that have lost more than 25% of their revenue from the COVID crisis. So grocery stores, I would love to see the grocery store that lost any revenue during this crisis. If they lost more than 25% and they have an R license, they would be eligible. But this legislation is really tailored to those restaurant and hotel licenses that have suffered because of this crisis. And it's just to give you, it's not the cure-all. It's not going to fix it, but it's something. And it gives you the opportunity to be a little bit more creative with what you're able to offer your guests out the door. Another piece of this is that if you have a restaurant or a friend or somebody who has a restaurant that is closed, they don't plan on reopening until this is over, or God forbid, they just aren't planning on reopening, there is a provision that would allow a licensee to sell their product to another licensee. So that would be an opportunity as well to get some more product. I will answer the question everybody is asking. Currently, you can only purchase wine if you have a wine expanded permit from the LCB. The LCB has since opened up all of their stores for curbside pickup, and we do have a commitment that they will be able to sell spirits to licensees as they need it during the crisis by the time this gets across the finish line, which gets to the last bullet point, will it pass? Bottles of spirits, we could not get the votes. I mean, we banged our head against the walls, and God bless Representative Mosser for sticking with us and fighting for us in this way. But we did get an agreement. We did get bipartisan support, and it got amended in the House 193 to 9 yesterday. So the House is going to pass it finally today. The Senate has said that they will move it. Of course, we're going to go hit the Senate hard to ensure that is the case. Depending on session, we could get this to the governor within the next 2 weeks. And of course, we would like to get it there faster, and if we can, we will. But we do have certain standards we have to meet in terms of session days to get it to the governor. But We wrote it clean so we wouldn't have to do other amendments or anything. We believe we have agreement, and our fingers crossed we will get this to the governor. He will sign it, and it is effective immediately. So there will be no phase in. As soon as it's signed, you can start selling mixed drinks out the door. All right, next one. Okay, PLCB, as I mentioned, the PLCB has expanded its curbside pickup to all of their stores. About 120 of their stores are actually doing purely the e-commerce site information, so all the finewinegoodsspirits.com orders, and then the rest are doing curbside pickup. As they expand, they will have more ability to provide product to licensees, as I said, as we get House Bill 327 across the finish line. But as they continue to expand, that will allow you more access to product as well. And then last week, if you are not sure, the LCB did open SLO orders. So you could start placing your special liquor orders starting last Wednesday. And I did explain this last week. I won't get into all the details again, but you really need to work with your vendor. If you have it's only available to people who hold a wine expanded permit. You can still get a wine expanded permit if you want one. They are $2,000, so weigh that carefully in your mind. And you need to work with your vendors because there are certain days that you have to place your order by. There's one day that they have to deliver in a window that the LCB provides, and then there's the day that you pick it up in a window that the LCB tells you you have to pick it up. If you miss any of those, then you have to wait for the next week to place your order and do it again. But SLOs will be delivered to licensee service centers twice a week. So if you have a wine expanded permit, you can start placing those orders with your vendors to get them sent to a licensee service center. It's only the 14 licensee service centers that are offering this right now. And as I said in our daily update last week, we had all of the information there. So please check that daily update if you need more information as it pertains to special liquor orders. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to Hope and John to go over some of the more general state updates, and then I will weed through some questions.
Thank you, Melissa. I think I probably gave as much of a state update as I can, but while you're looking through the questions, which I know won't take you long, I'll make a few more comments. Again, we appreciate the support that everyone has given to the association. It's been incredible to me that during this time where everyone on this call is working to try to take care of your team members and help and cause your businesses to survive, that you've taken the time to communicate with me, Melissa, and others about how much you appreciate what we're doing. I know that Melissa shares my feeling that at the end of the day, we just wish we could do more. We're doing everything we can, and it's never enough. This is a crisis of epic proportions that no one ever suspected would be the way it is. Nobody can relate to it, and and it just continues to get more challenging as we move on. We're going to continue to think of every way that we can to help, and we're open to any kind of feedback that you may have in that regard. In addition to the restaurant promise and the hotel promise, which was the convening of those two groups of hotel folks and restaurant folks, we've also convened a DMO panel yesterday. It was very helpful for us, talking about future dues for DMO members as well, PRLA dues. And then lastly, we have tomorrow, and Heidi's been taking lead on pulling these different working groups together, which has been very helpful. I think it's on Friday, actually. We have a catering group coming together, because one of the things that there's still so many questions about, and Melissa alluded to this, is we may understand how restaurants reopen, albeit very slowly and very challenging in getting reopened. We may understand that hotels are still open but have some new guidelines, but how are we going to bring in banquets, conventions, and catering? So this group is convening tomorrow, and we're getting some feedback from our friends at the National Restaurant Association on Friday, to try to come up with some potential standards that might be used in that regard. So we continue to try to navigate these waters coming out of this. The quote that you've heard many times now that was on Senator Toomey's town hall the other day, it's like we're flying at 35,000 feet and still designing the airplane. And that's really what it is, because nobody's been through this before. And for those restaurant folks on the call who are still frustrated about not getting open, Melissa commented on this recently, but if you read about what's happened in Georgia, very few restaurants have opened. The Waffle Houses have opened their chain, but very few independent restaurants have opened because the parameters are so difficult for them that they think it's better to stay where they are right now. And it's likely when we get into the green phase and we look at the parameters on restaurants, the same thing might happen. As I said, we have a nice dialogue with the administration to hopefully help with coming out with safe and yet sensible standards as we open restaurants, but that remains to be seen. We're still writing rules. So with that, Melissa, I'll turn it back to you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you want me to as well.
John, I just wanted you to go over HARP and carry out PA, unless Hope was going to do that.
I'm happy to do that.
I could do it too.
I'm happy to do that. And Hope, if you want to add anything about HARP, that's fine. HARP is the great effort that was really initiated by Justin Gensinger up in the Pocono Mountains with an initial donation from Tito's Handcrafted Vodka, and then a quick follow-up from Yingling and many others. So this is an effort to get money into the hands of displaced hospitality workers, which is virtually all of them. I think it's 81% of the restaurant employees and probably just as many of hotel employees now in our state. And so we did took our first staunch of applications. We had enough money to probably do somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 grants, not quite. We got about 1,400 applications. We're going to continue to raise money and continue to try to process applications as fast as we get money for that. So if you have a few extra dollars, go on to text HARP at 44321. It's on there, text to give, HARP 44321. And then we'll open the application process up periodically as soon as we get money in there. I think our funds were maybe at about $100,000 that we're working with in the first tranche. We'll just keep adding to that as we can. Carryout PA has been a terrific success. Many of our restaurants have reported to me, those that were doing 10% takeout business before the crisis, and some doing no takeout business, are doing upwards of 30, 40, and even 50% of their original revenue. Not enough to sustain a business long term, but at least it's helping them, and it's helping, obviously, the general public who needs access to food. So thank you to all of the 50% of the restaurants in Pennsylvania are open for takeout or delivery now. 1,500 of them roughly are on the Carryout PA site. We've had terrific promotion from DCED, Visit Pennsylvania, the governor's office, and many news outlets about Carryout PA. The number one question on all of the news outlets is, how can we help restaurants? And we tell them, go on Carryout PA, order food, and buy gift cards. So with that, Melissa, again, I'll turn it back to you.
Melissa, can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Quick. We really appreciate you all getting on these webinars every week, but just make sure to keep your eye out for the other webinars that we offer during the week. Tomorrow we will have one with Schmidt Kramer. That law firm will be coming on to talk about the business interruption insurance. They'll be available to review everything, how we came to where we are, and if you have questions, we'll be available to answer questions. Next week, we will also have another law firm coming, having a webinar on Tuesday talking about reducing your property taxes in PA during this time. And we will also be having some mental health and wellness programs that you can be instituting for your employees now and after you go back, to help them with this transition and everything that's been going on. So just keep an eye out for those as we send them out. With that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, let me work through some questions. Then I know I was emailed a few that I'll try and work through as well. Do you know how people are making applications for the new EIDL loans? The SBA site still has noticed that there's a lapse in appropriations. Our understanding is that they are working through the already submitted applications for the EIDL to see if they even have funds to open it up to new applications. So that last we had heard is they were working through kind of the applications that were in the queue, and then we'll open it up from there. With that being said, the SBA site and the Treasury site crashed on Monday when they were opening up the P3. So I think they're just having trouble managing the flow of applications that are going through. So for the EIDL, we are waiting to see if there are even funds available outside of them working through the existing applications that got halted due to the lack of funds. What is the chance of a 50-50 split for P3? Would it be smart for them to do it? Yes. But the entire goal of this administration is to pull people off of unemployment. So I can tell you that our national folks and all of us at the state are doing a hard push for it. We've reached out to our entire congressional delegation. I think there's a chance. I'm not holding my breath. But maybe I'll be surprised. But like I said, Treasury could have made that change 3 weeks ago and they didn't, which is what makes me a little nervous about if they're going to make the change now. Okay, no, John answered that one. Are salons, barbers included in the yellow as long as they follow CDC guidelines? There's been no mention of that. There's been no mention that they are still closed. There's been no mention that they can open. So that will probably be in Friday's update from the governor as it relates to reopening. My hair is doing okay. Macy's a little shaggy, so personally I'm rooting for the pet groomers to come back when we hit yellow stage. But I also understand that there's a need for our salons and barbers as well. So that has not been announced yet. Does this apply to vacation home rentals such as Airbnb and VRBO? We don't know. Our understanding is that if you are part of a campground or you are renting cabins via a camping ground site or that type of site, that you would possibly be included. Private campgrounds absolutely would be allowed to reopen on May 1st. Short-term rentals, according to the governor's guidance, it still says that they cannot be rented. And that was the updated FAQ document that was released on the 27th of this week. So as of that FAQ document, short-term rentals, private residences that are being rented out, they are still saying that's not permissible. But again, we have asked, I think 3 or 4 or 5 times over. Some of our DMOs have asked 6, 7, 8, or 9 times, 10 times over to get this clarification, and we are still waiting on that front. For cocktail sales, depending on the rules, some restaurants may achieve 60% while others will not. So will the latter be able to keep selling cocktails when others cannot? Yes. That the goal is that if you can, and we had to actually, we're able to put that provision in regarding cocktails because the initial push was that once we hit green stage, we shouldn't be able to sell cocktails anymore. And I said, even when we hit green, people aren't going to be out and dining like they used to. We're still going to be doing a ton of takeout. So the 60% is recognizing that once you hit that over 60%, then you would be able to operate. But some of that will come from the governor as well, depending on, is it going to be you can operate at 50% occupancy, or is it going to be occupancy doesn't matter as long as you have social distancing? All of those are going to be part of that 60% calculation. So that still needs to be figured out. Now, if they're saying occupancy and they're just using occupancy as the basis, then once they say maybe jump from 50 to 75%, then it would shut off for everybody. But if they're doing social distancing and you have to use it that way, some might still be able to sell cocktails out the door and others may not. Any way to extend House Bill 327 to restaurants that were prohibited from opening in the first place? We were scheduled to open April 1 and can't. I would, Laura, we might need to talk offline about that because I'm not sure if you have your liquor license and you haven't opened. I would say that you've definitely experienced a loss of revenue because you were unable to even have any revenue. As long as you have your liquor license and you are ready to open. So we might need to do a little bit of due diligence on that part. Let's see, could you repeat proposed eligibility for selling mixed drinks? If you are a restaurant or hotel license holder and you have lost 25% of your sales due to the COVID crisis, you are eligible to sell mixed drinks out the door. Those are the parameters. And I will add another parameter that I might not have mentioned before. You have to prepare the drink on the premises. So I know the LCB sells like cans of mixed drinks. Those aren't applied. So you have to mix an alcohol and a non-alcoholic beverage on the premises for you to sell it out the door. but it is for restaurant and hotel licenses only that have lost more than 25% due to the COVID crisis. What about special order spirits for licensees? Do you have to have a WEP? No, you don't need a WEP for special order spirits, though. Those aren't currently being sold to licensees through the LCB stores, because currently you can't sell spirit or mixed drinks out the door or spirits out the door. So currently licensees only with WEPs can access the licensee service centers for special liquor order wines, because technically the only product that LCB sells that restaurants can sell out the door is wine. Now, once we are able to get this bill passed within the next 2 weeks, you would be able to access your special liquor order spirits. You would be able to access regularly listed spirits. That would have to open up to all licensees. But in the interim, as we mentioned, you can purchase some product from other licensees if they want to sell you product, if it takes the LCB a little bit longer to get up and running. But now that all of the stores are open, we do think they'll be able to manage the extra items you will need to sell mixed drinks out the door. Just to clarify, will wine by the glass be included in House Bill 327? No, House Bill 327 is just for spirits. It's just for a mixed drink. So no, wine by the glass is not part of House Bill 327. So if you do not have a wine expanded permit and you are a restaurant licensee, this would allow you to sell 192 ounces of beer, which you've always been able to sell, and up to 64 ounces of mixed drinks out the door. You would not be able to sell wine in any capacity unless you have a wine expanded permit. If we pay dues through Heartland payment systems, will they be automatically suspending dues? John, do you know the answer to that one?
Hey, Michael, that program is so old, I don't even know anything about it. I remember hearing about that program through Heartland. But I'll get a response to you directly unless Hope has an answer.
I do know. Those transitioned over into our automatic reoccurring billings, which we did suspend, just like we suspended the other dues.
So the answer would be yes, it's suspended then, correct, Hope?
Yes.
Hey, Melissa, not to get in the weeds on this, but if you did a wine spritzer, would that be included in 327?
No.
Okay.
Because you're using wine as your, now
Has
if
to
you
have spirits in it.
yeah, if you throw in like a shot of vodka, maybe.
Okay.
But no,
All
not
right.
What work group would live music venues fall under? Could we create one? John, that's another one for you.
Yeah, we can get Heidi to reach out on that, Allison, to you, and then talk about the potentially getting that together. It's a really good concept that frankly we hadn't thought about yet.
Okay. Chris owes me like 3 memes for his questions lately. Question regarding hotel guests. How can they use common areas appropriately? A specific example is the fire pits at Silver Birches. Seems reasonable that a married couple could sit by themselves and enjoy a meal or drink. What's your interpretation? In red stage and even in yellow stage, they do not want, well, okay. This is me trying to get into the governor's mind, which is a terrible, terrible place to be, but I'm going to give it a whirl. Let's say red stage, no dice. Red stage, where we are now, they don't want any congregating. It doesn't matter. They don't even really want people eating food that they get for takeout in your common areas. It's not being super enforced, but they don't want it. Let's say we hit yellow stage. You can congregate in groups of less than 10. I would say as long as it is a group less than 10 in your common area with the takeout that they get from your restaurant, because your restaurant still can't open, I would purport that would be okay, as long as they're part of kind of the same group. That would be only in yellow stage. I don't see that being permissible as we're in the red stage right now. And like I said, that's me trying to get in the governor and Secretary Levine's head, and I might have failed, but that, from the guidance we're getting, that's where I think that would land. Yes, he is, Rick Noble. Senator Stefano is working on a bill to protect employees from targeted lawsuits that arise during the crisis when employers' accountability was out of control. It has not been introduced yet. You are correct. And yes, we are working, actually, Senator Stefano is the chairman of the Senate Law and Justice Committee, which deals with liquor issues. So we work very closely with him, and we are working very closely with his office on that bill. And further to that point, it's that liability protection that you all have been losing sleep over for when you reopen, when you have guests. If there is a case of COVID within your establishment, protecting you from that liability. And yes, we believe it will be introduced. We believe that it has support within the legislature. We might get some pushback, but we're working very closely with his office to offer those protections to all of you. That's the answer to that. It has not been introduced, and that one's going to take a little bit of due diligence on our end, but we're working on it. Has there been any talk about requiring plexiglass barriers, dividers between tables for dine-in restaurants? No, but there might be. It might be an option available to restaurants. And this is, as John said, I think part of the frustration is because the governor isn't allowing in-house dining to occur in the yellow stage, they haven't actually thought of what green stage is going to look like for restaurants. So we don't know the answer. That could be an option for some of you, but also it could be kind of a cosmetic thing that you want to work through as well. I think that a lot of that is going to come from the states that we're seeing reopening right now, that are allowing some restaurants to open even only at 25%. Because if it goes well, they're going to hit that 50% capacity sooner than we probably reopen. And then we'll kind of see what they're doing and what's working and hopefully duplicate it here. John, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, if I can, Melissa. Caleb, it's a good question. And I think it's fair to say we would not advocate for the requirement to have plexiglass barriers or dividers between tables for dining restaurants. We probably will have to support physical or social distancing requirements. However, if there was an option to use a physical barrier in lieu of physical distancing, as an example, on a booth, this came out of our restaurant reopening task force, as in a booth, if you had all booths in your restaurant, you'd probably have to leave every other booth empty. But if you were willing to put a plexiglass barrier on the back of the booth, between the two booths, then could that be an alternative to physical distancing? That would be something that we would probably advocate for, but we certainly wouldn't advocate for a requirement that all tables or booths have physical barriers between them. So that's how that could come up. What's going to actually happen, Melissa very appropriately said, we don't know, because we're not to the point of writing the rules for restaurants yet. The governor and his folks are not, I should say.
Cynthia Smith asked any thoughts on how NRA is progressing with their blueprint for recovery initiatives in general. And this is essentially the NRA has a document of things we need. Like I said, a lot of things that would be included in the COVID-4 package. They are working on all of those initiatives right now. Because Congress is not in session, they're kind of doing a lot of education and trying to put a lot of fires out. But there is a recognition. John and I were on a call yesterday, and it does seem that universally across both sides of the aisle, there is a recognition that our industry is going to need more help, and that there will need to be more recovery packages that we need. So progress is being made, but like I said, that back and forth between the Republicans and the Democrats regarding spending more or not spending more is really where this is going to flush out. So they're making progress, but until Congress returns on March 4th, we won't exactly know what that CARES or COVID-4 package is going to look like. Wait, hold on. I lost one. Let me scroll back down. Okay, let's see. Do you have a comment or suggestions about CARES for tackling business interruption insurance? Or is it wise for restaurants to join the class action suit I heard about and I believe Hope just talked about? Please join the webinar tomorrow that will go into business interruption insurance. And we do have legislation, as I said, at the state level, and there is talk at the federal level, but I will tell you this, and I did get some questions. PRLA was in a press release from Congressman Fitzpatrick because he introduced legislation, and I think it's called like the Never Again abandonment of business interruption insurance. And that's because they can't backdate or require insurance companies to pay for something that's already passed. So federal government can't do that. So what they're looking at the federal level is a recovery fund relating to paying out some version of business interruption insurance, but calling it something different, calling it a recovery fund. So we are working on that at the federal level. You can, if you want to join a class action suit, there's a difference between kind of what the federal government is trying to do and what we're trying to do in terms of legislation, which legislation is a hard lift. Like I said, it's hard to say you have to pay out something that's already passed. These lawsuits are focusing on they should have been paid out when it happened because they were covered or it should have been covered as part of the insurance. So that's the difference. We cannot speak to your individual decisions to join any of those lawsuits. There are a number of them circulating, and I would just urge you to participate in the webinar tomorrow because the firm that's doing it is actually leading a lot of those lawsuits, and we'll be able to talk through if this is an option or something that you might want to consider. So I would urge you to look at those. Let's see. Okay, thank you, Michael Leifer. Thank you to you as well. Thoughts about temperature monitoring of staff upon reopening, temperature checks of guests. Don't temperature check your guests. That I think is probably a lawsuit waiting to happen. Under the current guidelines from the government is if there is a case within your restaurant, somebody has been diagnosed with COVID or somebody has been exposed to COVID, you are required to temperature check your employees. That is the state requirement. Now, if you as a business want to go above and beyond and temperature check your employees, you are allowed to do that. During the state of a pandemic, you are allowed to temperature check your employees. There is no state requirement that you do it at the beginning of each shift for all of your employees, but you are able to do so if you want to at this time. So that is up to you, but the only state requirement, as I mentioned, is that if there has been a diagnosed case or somebody has been exposed to somebody with COVID. And as Hope said, business interruption insurance webinar is at 4:30 at 2 p.m. And I think, let me go through my questions real quick, make sure there's nothing, my email questions. In the event a guest arrives for check-in and they do not have a mask or bandana, are we able to sell them one? And if so, does the mask need to be individually packaged? If you are a hotel and you would like to sell a mask to your guests, you can. You cannot price gouge, so you have to have it very moderate. And quite honestly, your better bet would be to just provide one to them. They do not need to be individually packaged. There is no requirement on that front. But obviously, you would want to be careful in terms of giving masks to your guests in terms of making sure they're comfortable in accepting them. Let's see. We did have a question. The green phase, is it expected that we'll be able to open without capacity restrictions? I do not think we'll be able to, especially for our catering companies and large weddings. I don't see that in green phase. I think that's pretty much a guarantee. We are currently only accepting reservations for essential workers. Are we able to accept reservations for all guests at this time? Or do we still continue only accepting essential workers? I've gotten this question actually a lot. The burden, and this is why it's frustrating, because we would love to see black and white in this. The burden is on the individual not to travel. It is not on the hotel, which is allowed to operate, to say, are you traveling because you're an essential worker or are you traveling just for leisure? The burden is in Pennsylvania is that you should not be traveling. That's on the individual. It's not on you as the enforcer to enforce that. Now, some hotels have taken that route because they just don't want to have leisure travelers there because of the stay-at-home orders in their counties. But it's not up to the hotel to be the enforcer of that. But if you are concerned, again, I have heard mixed things where I've heard some that local police will come in and say, we don't want you to have any leisure travelers. So you might want to check with that. But under the guidelines, hotels can be open. There is no restriction on what type of guests hotels can accommodate. And you as the hotel owner are not the enforcer of whether somebody is traveling for leisure or because they're an essential worker. And did I get any other questions that I need to answer?
There's one more from Cynthia Smith.
Okay. From Tom? Do I even want to answer?
Oh, sorry, it's from Tom.
Do you foresee health departments giving restaurants that shut down voluntarily grief prior to reopening? we've gotten this question a few times, and we have, here's where we are. And we've asked the health department, the Department of Ag, about this. They don't have the resources to go and re-inspect everybody. Now, they might be prioritizing in their regular inspections restaurants that might have been shut down and reopened. But we have not heard, nor do we expect them to require an inspection before you can reopen. But with that being said, if you were shut down and you reopened, you might be subject to your regular inspection before maybe somebody who's been operating this entire time. But we have not gotten a guidance. We've heard nothing in terms of you can't reopen until you get re-inspected. And I am right at noon, so can I stop now?
Yes, you can definitely stop now. Just a real quick reminder to everybody on the call too, ServSafe is offering some free training, and it will expire on April 30th. To take advantage of it. It's the ServSafe food handlers, and there's some Serve Success programs. So please take a look at that. That's on our website. It was in the update yesterday. It's a great program to take advantage of and have your employees partake in it. That being said, this is being recorded. We will put this out on our website.
Thanks, Ben.
And we'll be sending this out as a recording to everybody that has signed up for it. Thanks again, Melissa, John, Eric, everybody that's made this call possible, and everybody getting on. Stay safe, and we'll be back next week.
Do it next week.
Thanks, Melissa. Good job.
Thanks.